February 22, 1944. 24,000 feet over Leipzig, Germany. The sky was a frozen ocean of pale blue and blown contrails, the kind that left spiraling ghosts hanging for minutes after the kill. Below, a wedge formation of B-17 flying fortresses droned eastward, box-tight, wings almost kissing, their silver skins flashing under the winter sun. This was mission number 229, a daylight raid on one of the Reich's last synthetic fuel plants. The Luftwaffe knew it was coming. So did every man in the sky. Second Lieutenant Jack Reynolds flew his P-51 Mustang high-cover, third flight, Red Squadron. He was 21 years old, 2 missions in, and so knew that his oxygen mask still smelled like rubber and factory glue. The roar of his Packard Merlin engine filled his bones, a steady beat beneath the constant radio hum. "Tighten it up, Red 3, you're drifting." That was Captain Vaughn, lead flight. Jack nudged the stick, slid back into position. His gloves felt too thick, his fingers too slow. They were an hour into enemy airspace now, and tension hung heavier than the frost on the canopy edges. The escorts kept their eyes peeled, high, low, behind. They weren't hunting today. They were the hunted. Every Allied pilot knew the Germans had been sending up new hardware, long-range Focke-Wulfs, cannon-armed twin booms, even whispers of jets. But Jack didn't need rumors to feel it. The sky had gone too quiet. No flak yet. No bandits. Just the smell of something about to break. Then the radio crackled with panic. Bandits. 11 o'clock high. Multiple bogies diving fast, looked like 190s. Jack jerked his head. Black crosses. Sun glinting off yellow noses. Focke-Wulf 190s screaming in from altitude like thunderbolts. The first pass was brutal, tracers stitched through the upper bomber formation. A B-17 rolled inverted, trailing fire, spiraling down with all 10 souls inside. Brake. Brake. Captain Vaughn's voice barked across the channel. Jack slammed the throttle forward, kicked left rudder, and felt the GS crush his spine as he peeled into a defensive arc. His eyes tracked a 190 climbing after its pass, belly exposed. He pulled lead, squeezed the trigger. The Mustang's Browning spat death, 4 guns, 50 caliber, each one hammering away at 750 rounds a minute. Tracers arced through the sky. Hits. Pieces flew from the 190's tailplane, and the German fighter wobbled, stalled, and dubbed straight down. Jack didn't have time to celebrate. Another 190 zoomed past from above, too fast to follow. The sky had become chaos, Mustangs and Messerschmitts in wild loops and dives, bombers trailing smoke, engines burning, bodies falling like ash. He heard it before he saw it. A metallic thump through the fuselage. A scream over the intercom. Reynolds checked his gauges, engine fine, no fires. Then he looked down. The lead bomber in the middle group, Wichita Maiden, B-17 tail number 483503, had taken a direct hit to the port wing. The number 2 engine was gone. Flames licked the nacelle. The fort was dropping, slow and sick. It was vulnerable. And something else was hunting it. A Bf-109 dove in, angling for the kill. No one else saw it. Jack was already banking hard. He could have waited for orders, could have checked his 6, but his gut didn't care. The Mustang screamed downward, intercepting the 109 just as it opened fire. Jack's bullets ripped into the Messerschmitt's wing root, punched through the cowling, and the plane shuddered midair like it had been gut-punched. Smoke erupted from its nose, and the 109 peeled away, trailing oil and parts. The bomber crew never even knew they'd been seconds from death. Jack pulled up, heart hammering, mouth dry. He rejoined his formation. Radio silence broken only by static and shouted calls for status. He glanced left, 2 Mustangs gone. Right, 1 limping home. They were bleeding. But they were still flying. The bombers dropped payload over target 10 minutes later. Leipzig burned. Fuel storage tanks exploded like dominoes under heaven. Mission success. When they got back to base in England, Reynolds walked away from his plane without a scratch. Crew chief slapped his shoulder. Captain Vaughn just looked at him. "That move you pulled," he said. "Who taught you that?" Jack shrugged. "Seemed right." Vaughn didn't smile, didn't nod. Just walked away muttering. But that night, Jack's name made the board. 1 kill confirmed, 1 probable. More importantly, no bombers lost from his squad. In the weeks that followed, other rookies would come. Some would crack. Some would die. But Jack Reynolds had earned something more than a tally on the fuselage. He'd earned a kind of silence in the briefing room. The kind that meant respect. March 3, 1944. 10 days after Leipzig. The morning briefing at Debden was quiet except for the rattle of typewriters and the occasional cough. The air smelled like burnt coffee and cold oil. Maps covered the wall, red pins for airfields, black ones for rail depots, and blue for rivers they'd follow home if the compass failed. Today's mission was another deep escort into central Germany, Brunswick this time. Heavy flak expected, fighter resistance certain. Jack Reynolds sat near the back, his flight jacket half-zipped, pencil tapping against the edge of his notebook. He wasn't nervous anymore, but he wasn't relaxed either. Nobody was. 2 days ago, they'd lost Lieutenant Harris on approach, hit by ground fire after a flawless sortie. Just like that, gone. A reminder that experience didn't buy immunity. When the ops officer finished his rundown, the room stayed silent. Everyone knew what the target meant: another oil plant, another reason for the Luftwaffe to throw everything they had left into the sky. As they filed out, Captain Vaughn stopped Jack at the door. "You're flying lead element today. Keep your head, Reynolds. We need every man back." Jack nodded. It wasn't pride he felt. It was weight. Responsibility. The kind that sat just behind the heart and didn't go away until you were back on the ground. The flight line was alive with noise by 0900. Engines roared, ground crews shouted over the din, and mechanics in oil-stained coveralls made last-minute checks on the Mustangs lined in perfect rows. Reynolds climbed into his aircraft, Lucky Lady, a new bird with a bright red nose and a small painted clover under the cockpit, his crew chief's idea, not his. He went through the motions automatically: fuel, flaps, mixture, pressure. When the Merlin caught and roared to life, the cockpit vibrated like a living thing. He loved that sound. Every pilot did. It meant you had another chance. Takeoff was smooth. The air was clear above 20,000 feet. By the time they crossed the Dutch coast, contrails stretched in every direction, silver threads across a blue ceiling. Below, the bomber stream was already visible, a massive formation crawling east like an airborne factory. 50 B-17s, maybe more. Reynolds and his flight slid into high cover, forming the protective halo above them. Radio chatter stayed light. A few jokes, a few course corrections, and then just the hum of engines. It was always quietest right before it happened. At 1143 hours, the call came. Bandits, 12 high. They appeared out of the sun, dozens of Bf-109s and Fw-190s diving from altitude. The Luftwaffe had waited for the perfect moment, using the glare to mask their approach. Reynolds didn't need orders. He pulled up hard, rolling right into the attack path. The first 190 flashed across his nose, he squeezed the trigger for a half-second burst, saw hits across the fuselage, then watched the German roll inverted and vanish in smoke. But the enemy wasn't focused on him, they were after the bombers. Reynolds spotted 3 Fw-190s breaking through the top cover, lining up their cannons on the second bomber group. If they got close enough, those 20mm shells would rip through the fortresses like paper. Jack shoved the throttle forward, climbing at full boost, his Mustang shuddering under the strain. He cut across their path from above, diving into the middle of their formation. The Germans scattered instinctively, breaking their line just as the bombers released their payloads. Below, the targets erupted in fire. Reynolds didn't stick around. He climbed again, scanning. That's when he saw it, a B-17 lagging behind, one engine out, another feathered. The plane was limping, alone, losing altitude fast. Behind it, 3 Bf-109s closed in. Nobody else saw them. The bomber's gunners were firing, but they wouldn't last. Reynolds didn't think twice. He broke formation, dove again. The Mustang screamed through the thin air, speed climbing past 400 miles per hour. He lined up the trailing Messerschmitt, opened fire at 300 yards. Tracers tore through its canopy. The German pilot never had a chance. The 109 rolled over, caught fire, and disappeared in a trail of black smoke. The second 109 turned to engage, but Reynolds stayed level, his burst slicing through its tailplane. The fighter disintegrated. The last German broke off, climbing steeply, not out of courage but survival. Reynolds leveled out behind the crippled bomber, close enough to see the waist gunners wave through the shattered glass. He stayed there for 20 miles, escorting it until it reached friendly cloud cover. By the time he rejoined formation, fuel was low, ammunition nearly gone. The mission clock showed 5 hours. When they landed back at Debden, the sun was already dipping below the horizon. The ground crews met them with open eyes and silence. The bombers that made it back were shot full of holes, but most were still flying. Reynolds shut down his engine, sat in the cockpit for a moment, and listened to it tick as it cooled. He didn't smile. He didn't even feel relief. Just exhaustion, the deep kind that came from being alive when others weren't. That night, he got called to debrief. The intelligence officer read from a notepad. "You broke formation again, Reynolds." Jack didn't argue. "But you saved an entire fortress crew. We got the gun camera film. 2 confirmed, 1 probable. You kept a crippled B-17 in the air all the way to the coast. The crew's sending a bottle of bourbon to your tent." Jack nodded, said nothing. He didn't need medals. The real reward was the sight of that bomber disappearing into the clouds instead of the ground. For a rookie, he was no longer learning to fly. He was learning to decide, in seconds, under fire, with lives on the line. The next morning, before the frost had melted off the wings, they were airborne again. This time, the target was Leipzig. Not as deep as Berlin, but still crawling with Luftwaffe response. Jack's Mustang, patched from yesterday's shrapnel, held together with fresh rivets and tape that fluttered in the wind. Crenshaw was beside him again. Quiet this time. Maybe too quiet. But Jack didn't press. Everyone processed near-death differently. Some drank. Some prayed. Some just stared out the canopy and didn't blink. As they crossed the Rhine, things felt off. There was no opposition. No radar pings. No contrails. No flak. Just empty skies and the hum of 1,000 engines moving eastward. Reynolds didn't like it. Silence wasn't safety, it was set up. He called it in, but headquarters brushed it off as weather interference. Still, he watched the edges of the formation like a hawk. That sixth sense was itching again. Then, at 21,000 feet over Merseburg, it hit. 20 Focke-Wulf 190s burst from the clouds above and behind, having flown radio silent and low beneath the radar. They screamed through the bomber formation with surgical precision, peeling off engines, slicing through wings, leaving contrails of smoke and blood. One B-17 took a hit to the fuel tanks and lit up like a sun. No shoots. Just a rolling fireball. Yellow flight was 5 minutes out of position. Jack didn't wait for orders. We break formation now, we lose the bombers. We stay, someone dies. It was a coin toss. A gut call. He broke left, throttle forward, and shouted coordinates. His flight followed without hesitation. They caught the FW-190's mid-turn, vulnerable and exposed. Reynolds dropped in from 8 o'clock high, caught 2 in a tight line, and opened fire. The first disintegrated, pure luck. The second veered off into a stall, the pilot bailing out just before impact. But the fight was chaos. There was no order, no lines, just a swirling mass of gunfire and smoke. Crenshaw radioed that his guns were jammed. Jack scanned for him, saw his Mustang ducking and weaving under a 190's tail. No time. Jack dove again, coming in behind the attacker and let loose a 2-second burst that shredded the fuselage. Crenshaw pulled out, alive, but trailing smoke. Reynolds stayed with him, escorting him back toward the bomber column like a shepherd with a wounded lamb. The other flights had engaged by now, but it was Jack's preemptive call that brought them the first blow, turned a massacre into a skirmish. When they landed, a captain from the bomber squadron shook his hand without saying a word. His eyes said enough. They counted the wrecks later. 4 Mustangs down. 13 enemy fighters destroyed. Most by yellow flight. Back at base, command reviewed Jack's radio logs, listened to his decision timeline. They didn't reprimand him for breaking position. In fact, 2 days later, he was promoted to flight leader. No ceremony. Just a hand-scrawled note taped to his locker, "You're not lucky, Reynolds. You're just right." He kept it there. Never mentioned it. Just flew the next mission like it was his last. Because for Jack, every flight was the same question: who comes home? And what will I have to do to make sure they do? Over the next month, his instincts continued to carve out narrow escapes, threading needles no one else could see. And slowly, even the older pilots started trailing his 6. They called him the shepherd, behind his back. Not out of mockery. Out of quiet gratitude. The Luftwaffe still ruled many skies. But not his. Not where Reynolds flew. The following week brought a new directive: deep escort run to bomb synthetic oil plants in Brux, just north of the Czech border. A long haul. Longer than most of the Mustangs liked. Command plotted it to the inch: fuel economy, climb rate, combat allowance, and return leg. Jack studied the map like a surgeon before an operation. He didn't just look at the route. He looked at where they'd die if things went wrong. Forests, rail lines. Enemy airfields. Places you could hide. Or crash. Or burn. He memorized them. The morning of the mission, frost clung to the runway like the nerves on every pilot's face. Briefing had warned them of expected heavy resistance near Dresden. The Germans were adapting, using mixed formations now. Throwing in a few Me-262s with the piston-engine FW-190s to confuse and scatter the escorts. High-speed slashes followed by chaotic dogfights. Reynolds wasn't worried about chaos. He thrived in it. Halfway there, passing over Erfurt, the flak opened up like it had been waiting all morning. Black blossoms filled the sky. Bombers held tight, wings overlapping in textbook formation. Then came the fighters. First the usual suspects. A dozen Focke-Wulfs, peppering the lead bomber boxes. Reynolds called out targets, tightened his formation, and went in clean. He picked one off the tail of a B-17, saw the canopy shatter, watched the 190 tumble through a cloud bank like a kicked can. But that wasn't the threat. Not yet. They came in from above and behind like lightning, Me-262s. Jets. Fast as hell. Too fast. You heard them before you saw them. Or sometimes, not at all. 2 streaked past him like silver ghosts, their cannon shells ripping into the lower bomber echelon. 1 fortress dropped like a brick, both wings ablaze. Too fast to chase, Crenshaw growled over the radio. "No," Jack replied. "They have to slow to climb or turn. That's when they meet." Reynolds shifted altitude, leveled off near 26,000 feet, and scanned the top edge of the engagement. There, a jet pulling a wide arc too wide. He knew the pilot was trying to swing back into position, but he'd bled speed. Jack banked, rolled, dove, and waited until the silhouette grew larger in his canopy. Then he fired. It wasn't pretty. The shells walked across the fuselage, then struck an engine. Flames. Not an explosion, but enough. The 262 nosed down, trying to glide it out. The rookie just took down a jet. Back at base, nobody believed it at first. The 262 was supposed to be invincible. A glimpse of Germany's future. But Reynolds proved otherwise. Not by speed. Not by brute force. But by understanding momentum, geometry, gravity, and human behavior inside a machine that wasn't built to make mistakes. He started training the new arrivals. Not officially, just late-night hangar talks. They can outrun you. Don't chase. Trap them. Let them overcommit. They are fast, but they are cocky. Every pilot who heard him walked out with a little more confidence. Or maybe just a little more edge. 2 missions later, another 262 went down, this time by Lieutenant Harris, one of Jack's trainees. The base put up a chalkboard. Jets killed, it read. Jack didn't like it. Killing wasn't the goal. Survival was. But the board stayed. Numbers rising. The myth of the Me-262 began to crack. And Jack Reynolds, the quiet shepherd, the rookie with split-second instincts, was the wedge driving it open. Not just with bullets, but with a mindset that turned panic into patience, instinct into doctrine, and chaos into strategy. He didn't talk about it much. The kill. The jet. The split-second angle that separated 10,000 pounds of screaming steel from a bomber crew's last breath. Reynolds just kept flying. Same jacket. Same boots. Same thermos of bitter coffee. But something shifted. Not in him, around him. Crews started leaning in closer during his post-mission debriefs. Ground chiefs listened when he grunted about engine lag. Even Colonel Hastings, who once called him a dive-happy cowboy, gave him nods without words. By March, Bomber Command was rolling deep into the Ruhr. Oil, coal, ball bearings, everything Hitler needed to keep the war machine turning. The Luftwaffe was throwing everything they had to stop them. Mixed fighter sweeps, bait-and-run decoys, and those damn Me-262s. And now the jets were coming in packs. On March 18, during a raid on Luna, Reynolds was flying top cover over the 3rd bomber box when the sky cracked open. 4 262s came diving in from 30,000 feet like thunderbolts, their 30mm cannons lighting up the sky like camera flashes. 2 B-24s disintegrated instantly. No parachutes. No second chances. Jack didn't even call out on the radio. He didn't need to. His wingmen followed the tilt of his nose. He didn't go straight for the jets. He went above them. Way above. Climbed until the Mustang started to cough. Then he cut throttle, turned inside the sun, and waited. The jets passed beneath, pulling back to climb again for a second strike. That's when he dropped. Gravity. Momentum. Positioning. The physics of war. He lined up behind the trailing 262, riding its climb like a shadow. Too fast to aim. Too fast to think. He fired a 3-second burst. One wing tore free, spiraling off like a maple seed. The jet flipped, snapped into a spin, and vanished into the clouds below. The other 3 jets scattered. They weren't invincible anymore. The Me-262 was a marvel of engineering, but it bled energy like a stuck pig in a turn. In the hands of a cocky pilot, it was a trophy. But Reynolds wasn't hunting trophies. He was protecting the box. That was the mission. When they landed, he didn't celebrate. He walked the flight line, checking fuselages for bullet holes, noses for cracks, oil lines for leaks. That one needs her right aileron adjusted, he told the chief. Then he disappeared into the briefing tent without waiting for a reply. Weeks passed. The squadron kept flying. Kept learning. And something strange happened. Fewer bombers were going down. Fewer names read out in the mess hall. Reynolds never claimed credit. But others did. Young lieutenants started carrying themselves differently. Not cocky, sharp. Alert. Focused. The brass noticed. They pinned another medal on him. He tucked it in a drawer. Because the war wasn't over. The 262 wasn't gone. And Reynolds knew better than anyone, split-second save squadrons. but they also fade fast. The weather over southern Germany turned foul by late April, low clouds, sleet at altitude, angry crosswinds battering formations apart like marionettes in a storm. But the missions didn't stop. If anything, they intensified. Fuel depots, rail yards, synthetic oil plants. The war was entering its final, brutal chapter, and every gallon of gasoline the Allies denied Hitler was another Panther tank that wouldn't start, another 88mm gun that wouldn't fire. Reynolds now flew with a scar over his left eyebrow, a gift from a canopy fragment during a March engagement that sent him back to England for 12 days. When he returned, the squadron barely recognized him. Not because he looked different, he didn't, but because something in the air changed when he walked into the hangar. It was like gravity shifted slightly toward him. Like even the noise of the base quieted just a little. By then, the 262 pilots had changed, too. No longer arrogant, they were desperate. Flying fewer sorties. Dodging fuel shortages. Sometimes even launching with just enough gas for one pass. But when they came fast, silent, and lethal. And they were no longer testing the waters. They were hunting. May 3rd. A flight of B-17s pushing toward Linz. Reynolds led Blue Flight, 3 P-51s positioned ahead of the lead bomber element. Radio chatter was light. Too light. The 262s didn't call ahead. They appeared like ghosts, out of sun, from high altitude, engines screaming through the cloud deck. This time, it was 5 jets. 5. Reynolds didn't flinch. He didn't wait for radio clearance or tactical doctrine. He'd already studied them, knew their turning arcs, their climb-out patterns, their blind spots when they leveled off after an attack. He barked a single command over the MIC, now, and his flight peeled off in perfect synchronicity, fanning like hawks across the stratosphere. The first 262 dove through the bomber box, spraying 30mm shells like a fire hose. Reynolds was already behind him, already climbing. He knew the jet would flatten out, then climb, always. Predictable in its speed, inevitable in its tactic. This time he didn't fire. Not yet. He stalked. He let the jet reach for the clouds, let it believe it was alone. Then, right as the engine exhaust flared blue, Reynolds squeezed the trigger. 6.50 caliber Brownings lit up. The rounds caught the Me-262 just behind the cockpit. The canopy shattered. The jet didn't explode, it just stopped flying. Like its soul had been pulled out mid-air. The other jets scattered. 2 broke away. 1 spiraled straight down in panic. Another tried to loop back for a second run, mistake. Reynolds' wingman caught it on the cross and ended it before it could react. By the time they landed back in England, bomber losses were 0. The debrief was silent at first. No one knew what to say. They just looked at Reynolds. He poured himself a tin cup of coffee. Saturday. Looked out across the tarmac. That was close, he finally said. Not a boast. Not a punchline. Just a man who saw too much, too fast, and moved even faster. And in doing so, saved 57 men who would have otherwise died in silence above a foreign sky.